The check was in a cream envelope with his initials on the flap. F.J.H. Frank James Harper. He'd had those envelopes printed at an office supply store sometime in the late 90s, and he still used them for everything he considered official. Birthday cards, Christmas money for the grandkids, and apparently life-changing gifts handed across a dinner table to his favorite daughter, while I sat 4 seats away with a glass of sweet tea going warm in my hand. It was a Sunday in October. The light coming through the dining room windows was the low gold kind that makes everything look warmer than it is. Amber was crying, happy crying, the performative kind where you press your fingertips under your eyes so your mascara doesn't run. Her husband Todd was shaking my father's hand. Todd's mother, seated to my left, said, "Frank, that is just so generous." My father nodded like a man accepting his due. He looked at me then, directly, and he said, "You're on your own, Nora, Jade. You always have been. Amber needs this more than you ever will." He'd almost called me Nora, my mother's name. He caught himself. He always caught himself. 6 people at that table heard him say it. Not one of them said a word. I set my glass down, picked up my jacket from the back of my chair, and I walked out the same door I'd been walking in and out of since I was 7 years old. But here's what none of them knew. Not my father, not Amber, not Todd or his mother, or the 2 cousins who'd been invited to witness this little ceremony. My contractor's license number was sitting on 2 active building permits, pulled in my father's name, on properties I had renovated with my own hands, that I had never been paid a single dollar for. What happened over the next 11 months dismantled everything he thought he'd built. And I did it the same way I do everything, one measured line at a time. Welcome back to Home of Secrets. My name is Jade Harper. I'm 31 years old, and I'm a licensed general contractor and the owner of Harper Build Company in Knoxville, Tennessee. I started my company with a used pickup truck, a set of tools I inherited from my grandfather, and exactly $0 from my family. This is the story of how my father handed my sister $100,000 and told me I was on my own, and what I built while he wasn't watching. If that sounds familiar, drop a comment below. And if you're new here, subscribe. This channel is for people who built it themselves. My grandfather's name was Earl Harper. He was a Finnish carpenter for 31 years in Knox County. He built furniture in his garage on weekends, not as a hobby, as a practice. Dovetailed joints by hand, mortise and tenon. He had a pencil he kept behind his ear every day of his working life. A flat carpenter's pencil, worn down to about 4 inches. The wood gone soft at the grip end from years of use. When I was 9 years old, he pressed it into my hand and said, "You've got the eye, Jade. Don't let anybody take it from you." He died 6 months later, cardiac arrest, a Thursday morning, in the garage he loved. I kept the pencil. I kept it in the front pocket of whatever I was wearing for years, then in the breast pocket of my work shirts when I started in the trades at 19. It's 4 inches of soft cedar and graphite, and it is the only inheritance I have ever received from anyone in my family. My father is not a carpenter. My father is a man who owns things. He bought his first rental property in 1998, a 2-bedroom house on Glenwood Avenue. And by the time I was in high school, he had 4 of them, plus the house we grew up in. He managed them himself, which mostly meant he called plumbers when pipes burst, and ignored everything else, until it became urgent. He was not handy. He had no interest in becoming handy. Handy was for people who couldn't afford to pay someone else. Amber is 4 years older than me. Amber went to University of Tennessee on a college fund my parents had been building since she was born. She graduated in 4 years with a degree in communications, got married at 26 to Todd Price, whose family owns a landscaping company in West Knoxville. My father gave a toast at their wedding that lasted 11 minutes. I timed it. He cried twice. I did not have a college fund. When I asked my father about it at 17, he said the money had gone into the properties and that I was resourceful, and he was sure I'd figure something out. He said it the way you say something you've already decided isn't your problem. I figured something out. I got my GED a semester early, walked into Walt Greer's construction company on a Monday morning at 18 years and 4 months old and asked for a job. Walt Greer is 63 now. He was 51 then. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "You know anything about framing?" I said my grandfather was Earl Harper. Walt had known Earl. He said, "Start Monday." I worked for Walt for 6 years. Framing, drywall, finish work, roofing, concrete. I got my contractor's license at 24. By 25, I knew more about residential construction than my father had learned in 30 years of owning properties. He never acknowledged this. When I got my license, he said, "That's good, Jade." Same tone he used when I told him I'd gotten my GED, the tone of a man checking a box. Amber got a toast. I got a checked box. That was the Harper family in full. It started the way these things always start, with a reasonable-sounding request and a family obligation I didn't know how to refuse. I was 25. Harper Build Company was 8 months old. I had 3 employees, a small commercial contract with a property management group downtown, and approximately $14,000 in the business account after expenses. I was not flush. I was functional. My father called on a Thursday evening in March and said he had a situation with the Glenwood property. The kitchen needed to be gutted and rebuilt. The tenant had left. The next one wanted updated finishes, and he wanted to get it done before the end of April. He said he'd pay for materials. He asked if I could do the labor. I said yes, because he was my father, because I was 25, and still believed that doing things for family meant something to this particular family. The Glenwood kitchen took 3 weeks. I did it with my foreman, Hector. I'll tell you more about Hector later. Working weekends and 2 evenings a week around our paid jobs. New cabinets, countertops, backsplash, flooring, updated electrical for the appliances. My hourly rate at the time was $65 for licensed contractor work. Hector was $45. We logged every hour. When we finished, I handed my father an invoice. Not a demand, a record. $18,400 in combined labor hours. He looked at it and said, "I'll settle up with you." He never did. I didn't push. I told myself it was a family thing, and family things don't always run on invoices. That was the first mistake. It was also the template for everything that followed. Over the next 3 years, my father called with 4 more jobs. The Glenwood bathroom, a full renovation of the Merchant Street duplex, both units, top to bottom, new drywall, new flooring, kitchen updates, 2 bathroom remodels, the Ridgeline property's roof, which required a full tear-off and replacement, and finally, the Beaumont house, his largest rental, which had sat vacant for 8 months and needed everything. HVAC rough-in, new windows, complete kitchen, Master bath expansion. Each time, he paid for materials. Each time, I provided the labor. Each time, I handed him an invoice. Each time, he said some version of, "I'll take care of it." He did not take care of it. Hector kept records. This is important. Hector Ruiz has been my foreman since Harper Build Company was 4 months old, and Hector logs every job in a green composition notebook. Hours, crew, materials used, job address. He's been doing it since before he worked for me, since his first construction job at 17. He says his father told him a man who doesn't write it down doesn't own it. I have never argued with that. At the end of those 3 years, Hector and I sat at my kitchen table and went through every notebook entry for every Harper family job. We calculated labor at my standard rates. Conservative, the rates I was charging paying clients, not the premium rates I could have charged given my license tier by year 3. Total labor value across 4 properties over 3 years, $91,400. Materials I had fronted out of pocket. Small things. Supplies I'd bought on a run, and never billed back because the amounts felt petty in the moment. I went through my receipts. That number came to $14,200. Total value of unpaid work provided to Frank Harper's rental portfolio, $105,600. $105,600. While my father was building a $100,000 gift for my sister in a cream envelope with his initials on the flap. If you've ever done the math on what you've given a family that never added you into their budget, stay with me. Because the math is only part of the story. The humiliations were smaller, but they compounded. At a neighborhood barbecue in the summer of my 27th year, my father introduced me to his friend Gary as my daughter. She does construction work. Not, she owns a construction company. Not, she's a licensed contractor. Construction work. Like I was swinging a hammer for someone else's paycheck. At Amber's baby shower the following spring, my mother, who had largely stayed out of the financial dynamics, but had never intervened in them either, told her friends I had a little business. Amber's husband, Todd, had a real operation going with the landscaping company. Mine was little. I had 12 employees by that point, and a contract with a regional developer for 3 residential builds. But it was little. I said nothing at the barbecue. I said nothing at the baby shower. I smiled and I drove home, and I opened my laptop and I worked. That's what I always did. I worked. October 14th, 2023, a Sunday. My father had called the previous week to say he wanted the family together for a dinner. He didn't say why. My father occasionally called family dinners without stated reasons. It was a habit he'd developed since my mother died in 2019, as though the gatherings themselves were a substitute for the person who had previously held us all in the same orbit. I went, because I still went. Because hope is a thing that takes a long time to fully exhaust. The dinner was at the house on Carver Road, my childhood home. I had replaced the back deck on that house in the summer of 2022, Gus. 4 weekends, pressure-treated lumber, new railing system, composite decking, unpaid. My father had said it looked great. That was the whole acknowledgement. I arrived at 5:30. Amber and Todd were already there, which was unusual. Amber was constitutionally late to everything. Todd's mother, Patricia Price, was seated in the living room with a glass of white wine. 2 of my cousins, Linda and Greg, had been invited. I didn't know why until we sat down. The meal was catered. That was also unusual. My father had ordered from a barbecue place he liked, everything in aluminum trays. We served ourselves buffet style and sat down, and the conversation was normal for 20 minutes. Todd's business, Amber's son Cooper's soccer league, Linda's new apartment in Nashville. Then my father stood up. He didn't tap his glass. He just stood, and the table went quiet the way tables go quiet when the person standing has always been the loudest presence in the room. He said he wanted to make an announcement. He said that Amber and Todd had been going through a difficult stretch financially. The landscaping business had taken a hit. They had the house, the kids, and he had decided he wanted to help. He said family takes care of family. He reached into the breast pocket of his shirt and took out the cream envelope. He said he was giving Amber and Todd $100,000. No conditions. No repayment. A gift. Amber made the sound she makes when she's performing gratitude. A small gasp, both hands over her mouth. Todd stood and shook my father's hand. Patricia Price said, "Frank, that is just so generous." Linda and Greg applauded. Actually, applauded. I sat with my hands in my lap. My father looked at me then. He had been aware of me the entire time, the way you're aware of a window when you're standing in a room, peripherally, without focus. But now he looked directly at me and he said, "You're on your own, Jade. You always have been. Amber needs this more than you ever will." He said it without cruelty. That was the part that took the longest to process. He said it the way you state a fact about weather. Matter of fact. Almost kind. As if he was paying me a compliment. As if being on my own was a settled thing, and he was simply confirming it. 6 people heard it. 6 people said nothing. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair. I said, "Congratulations, Amber." I meant it, actually. None of what was about to happen was Amber's fault. She had simply been the one who got the envelope. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not quite guilt, not quite relief. Something in between. I walked out. The screen door bounced once in its frame behind me, but didn't slam. I pulled it shut properly as I left. I sat in my truck in the driveway. It was the same truck I'd started the company with, better maintained now. Harper Build Company on the door in white vinyl lettering. I pulled grandfather's pencil out of my breast pocket, and I held it for a moment. Then I started the engine and drove home. I had 2 calls to make, and what I found out on the second one changed everything. The first call was to Hector. It was 8:40 on a Sunday night. He picked up on the second ring. I told him we were done with Harper family jobs, effective immediately. No pending work, no favors, no exceptions. He said, "About time." That was all he said. Hector is not a man who wastes words on situations he has been watching develop for 3 years. The second call was to my attorney, a woman named Sandra Poole, who handles business and contract law for Harper Build Company. I'd been using Sandra since year 2. I told her I needed to check something first thing Monday morning, and I'd send her a document. She said she'd be in at 8. That night, I pulled up the Knox County permit database. It's public record. Anyone can access it. I typed in my contractor license number, TN-G C-2 847 DICE, and filtered by permit holder. 22 permits came up. 14 of them were mine, SAS, legitimate Harper Build Company jobs, properly filed, properly closed. 8 of them were not. 8 active or recently closed permits on properties I had never filed paperwork for. 4 of them were on addresses I recognized immediately. Glenwood Avenue, Merchant Street Unit A, Merchant Street Unit B, Ridgeline Drive. My father's properties, the ones I had renovated with my own hands over 3 years. My license number. My name on the line that says licensed contractor of record. Permits I had never signed. Work I had done without permits being pulled. And then, at some point, someone had gone into the county system and filed retroactive permits using my credentials. I closed the laptop. I put both hands flat on the desk. I sat like that for approximately 2 minutes. Then I opened the laptop back up and forwarded the permit records to Sandra with one line. Monday at 8. I need to understand my liability exposure here. I slept 4 hours, not because I was upset, because I was calculating. My father called on Tuesday. I let it go to voicemail. He said he hoped I wasn't taking Sunday the wrong way, and that he'd always been proud of my independence, and that he just felt Amber's situation was more pressing right now, and he hoped I understood. He did not mention the permits. By the following weekend, the family narrative, delivered through my cousin Linda, who has never met a piece of information she didn't want to distribute, was that I had stormed out of dinner because I was jealous of Amber's gift, that I had always had a chip on my shoulder, that I needed to grow up and stop expecting my father to hand me things when I was perfectly capable of handling myself. The irony of that last point was not lost on me. Amber texted me on October 22nd. She said she was sorry if the dinner was uncomfortable and that she hoped we could get together soon. I texted back, I'm glad for you, Amber. Take care of yourself. That was all. Todd called once. I didn't answer. He didn't leave a voicemail. My father posted something on Facebook. He's on Facebook the way men his age are on Facebook, inconsistently and with poor photo cropping. A picture of the family at the dinner, taken before I arrived. Amber and Todd, Linda and Greg, Patricia Price, my father at the head of the table. The caption said, Grateful for family. 47 likes. Several comments about what a good man he was. I did not comment. I did not post. I opened my permit documentation spreadsheet, and I added 2 new columns. Date filed and filed by. Because here's the thing about public records. They tell you not just what was filed, but when. And sometimes they tell you enough about the how that the rest becomes obvious. The permits on my father's properties had been filed by a permit expediter, a service some contractors and property owners use to handle paperwork. The expediter's name was on 3 of the 8 filings. I wrote it down. I would need it later. Sandra Poole's office is on the 4th floor of a building on Gay Street in downtown Knoxville. She has been practicing business law for 22 years, and she has the particular quality of stillness that very good attorneys develop, the ability to receive information without reacting to it while they're still taking it in. I sat across from her desk on Monday morning, and I walked her through everything. The 3 years of unpaid labor, the invoices that had never been paid, the permit database, the 8 filings under my license number. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Who filed them?" I told her about the permit expediter. His name was Ray Calhoun. He ran a one-man operation out of a home office in Hall's Crossroads. I had never hired him. I had never spoken to him. But his name was on my father's permits with my license number. Sandra said, "That's license fraud, Jade. Whoever authorized him to use your credentials without your knowledge committed a crime. Potentially your father, potentially Calhoun, potentially both." I said I understood. She said, "Do you want to report it?" I said not yet. I said I wanted to understand the full picture first. Sandra requested the complete permit files through a public records request, the actual application documents, not just the database entries. They came back in 4 business days. The applications had a signature line for the contractor of record. On 6 of the 8 permits, the signature line read J. Harper, in handwriting that was not mine. Someone had signed my name to a government document 6 times. Sandra set the papers down and looked at me. She said, "This is forgery. This is not a civil matter. This is a criminal matter." I said I knew. I also knew something else. 2 of the 8 properties were currently occupied by tenants under active leases. If the permits were fraudulent, if the work had been done and permitted under a forged contractor signature, the tenants had potential claims. The properties had potential code compliance issues. My father's rental portfolio, the thing he had been building for 25 years, was sitting on a foundation of paperwork that had my forged name on it. I went home that night, and I called Walt Greer. Walt is the kind of man who answers the phone like he's been expecting your call. I told him what I'd found. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your grandfather would have handled this the same way you're about to handle it." I asked how he knew what I was about to do. He said, "Because Earl Harper's granddaughter doesn't panic. She measures twice." I measured twice. Then I called Sandra back and told her to file the report. The complaint went to the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance, which oversees contractor licensing, and to the Knox County District Attorney's Office for the forgery component. Sandra filed both on November 3rd, 2023. I was listed as the complainant. My father's name and Ray Calhoun's name were both in the filing. Sandra also sent a formal demand letter to my father on November 7th. It outlined the 3 years of unpaid labor, itemized by property and by year, with Hector's notebook as the supporting documentation. Total demanded $105,600. The letter gave him 30 days to respond before we filed a civil claim. He called me the evening the letter arrived. I answered this one. He said, "What is this?" I said, "It's a demand letter, Dad. Sandra can explain the specifics if you need clarification." He said, "You're suing your own father." I said, "I'm asking to be paid for work I did, the same work any other contractor would have been paid for." He said I was being vindictive. He said this was about the dinner. He said I had never been able to handle things not going my way. I said, "I've been handling things on my own my entire life. You said so yourself, in front of 6 people. He hung up. Amber called 2 days later. She said she didn't know what was happening, but she wanted me to know she had nothing to do with the permits. I believed her. I told her I believed her. I said this was between me and Dad and Sandra and the DA's office, and she didn't need to be in the middle of it. She started crying. Real crying this time, not the mascara-preserving kind. I said I was sorry she was in a hard position. I meant that too. In December, the TDCI opened a formal investigation into the permit filings. Ray Calhoun was contacted. He retained an attorney. His attorney, I was told through Sandra, indicated that Calhoun had been hired and directed by the property owner, my father, and had been told the contractor had given verbal authorization. Verbal authorization for a forged signature. Sandra said that was not going to hold up. I said I didn't imagine it would. January 2024. The Knox County DA's office issued a target letter to my father. I found out from Sandra, not from him. He had retained his own attorney by then, a man named Philip Graves, who did property and business law in Knoxville. Graves contacted Sandra in mid-January to discuss settlement on the civil claim. February 14th, 2024. Valentine's Day. Sandra called me at 9 a.m. She said Graves had come back with an offer, $60,000, and a signed acknowledgement that the permit filings had been unauthorized. I said no. Sandra said, "What's your number?" I said, $105,600, the full amount, plus legal fees. She said, "He may not go there." I said, "Then we go to the public hearing," because here is what I hadn't told my father yet. The TDCI investigation had generated a mandatory Knox County Code enforcement review of all 8 properties. 2 of those properties had code issues that needed to be remediated before their certificates of occupancy could be reaffirmed. Until they were remediated, they could not be legally occupied. 2 of my father's 4 rental properties were at risk of being vacated by order of the county. The public hearing was scheduled for March 19th, 2024. The Knox City County Building. It was a matter of public record. Anyone could attend. I put on my work boots, and I went. The Knox City County Building is on Main Street. It's a civic building from the 60s. Solid, plain, the kind of architecture that communicates authority without flourish. The code enforcement hearing room is on the 2nd floor. Rows of fixed seats. A raised panel of 3 hearing officers. A podium for testimony. I arrived at 8:15 for a 9 o'clock hearing. Hector was with me. Walt Greer had driven 40 minutes from his place in Maryville and was seated 3 rows back when I walked in. He nodded once. I nodded back. My father arrived at 8:45 with Philip Graves. He saw me immediately. The room was not large. There was no avoiding the sight line. He looked older than he had at the October dinner. His jaw was set in the way it gets when he's managing something he doesn't know how to manage. He walked toward me. Graves put a hand on his arm. My father shook it off. He stopped 2 feet in front of me and said, in a low voice, "You didn't have to do this." I said, "You filed permits under my forged signature on 4 properties. I did have to do this." He said, "I was going to pay you back." I said, "When?" He opened his mouth. He closed it. I said, "You gave Amber $100,000 in October. You owed me $105,600 for 3 years of labor on those same properties. I would like you to think about the order of those 2 events." Graves stepped in and said this wasn't the appropriate venue for this conversation. I agreed with him. I turned and walked back to my seat. The hearing opened at 9:04. The hearing officer read the case number and the property addresses. She summarized the TDCI findings. She noted that building permits on 2 properties had been filed under a contractor license number, without documented authorization from the license holder, and that the signatures on the permit applications did not match the license holder's documented signature on file. She asked if the contractor of record was present. I stood up. I said, "Yes, Jade Harper, TN-GC-2847. She asked if I had authorized the permit filings. I said, "No, I did not." She asked if I had been aware the permits were filed under my license. I said, "I became aware on October 15th, 2023. I filed a complaint with the TDCI on November 3rd. The hearing officer made a note. She turned to Philip Graves and asked if the property owner had a statement. Graves stood and gave a prepared statement about the property owner's long history of responsible ownership in Knox County. and his intention to remediate all code deficiencies. He said the permit situation was the result of a misunderstanding with a third-party expediter, and that his client accepted full responsibility for the administrative irregularities. Administrative irregularities. I wrote those 2 words in my notebook. The hearing officer issued her findings. Both properties required remediation within 60 days. Certificates of occupancy suspended pending inspection. Civil penalty of $4,800 per property. Total civil penalty, $9,600. The criminal forgery matter was noted as a separate ongoing proceeding with the DA's office, and outside the scope of today's hearing. My father stood up. Graves reached for his arm again. My father said, loudly enough for the room to hear, "She worked for family. That's what family does." The hearing room was quiet. I turned in my seat and looked at him. I said, clearly, without raising my voice, "Family also pays what they owe." One of the other people present, a man I didn't know, there for a different case, actually wrote something down. I noticed that. My father sat down. He did not look at me again for the remainder of the hearing. Outside, on the steps of the city-county building, Walt Greer shook my hand and said, "Earl would have been proud." I put my hand in my breast pocket and touched the carpenter's pencil. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Here is what happened after March 19th, 2024. Ray Calhoun reached a deferred prosecution agreement with the Knox County DA's office in April. He agreed to testify that Frank Harper had directed him to file the permits and had represented that verbal authorization from the contractor had been obtained. Calhoun's expediting license was suspended for 18 months. My father was charged with 2 counts of filing a false government document and 1 count of identity fraud under Tennessee law. His attorney negotiated a plea agreement in June. No jail time, 2 years of supervised probation, a $12,000 fine, and a mandatory compliance course for property owners. He was not convicted of forgery at the felony level, which his attorney called a win. I did not contest the plea. The civil settlement came through on May 2nd, 2024. $105,600 plus $14,800 in legal fees, paid in full, wired to the Harper Build Company operating account on a Thursday afternoon. I was eating lunch at my desk when Sandra sent the confirmation. I finished my sandwich. Then I called Hector and told him. He said, "Good." That was all. The 2 properties with suspended certificates of occupancy cost my father $34,000 in remediation work he had to hire an actual licensed contractor to complete at actual market rates, with actual signed paperwork. I was not that contractor. I recommended a firm I trusted. They did good work. My father sold the Ridgeline property in August and the Beaumont house in October. Between the civil penalty, the remediation costs, the legal fees, and the settlement, his rental portfolio had cost him, net, more than it had earned him in 2 years. His attorney filed the sale paperwork. I know because Knoxville is a small city, and property transactions are public record, and I look at public records the way some people look at their phones. Amber called in July. She said she and Todd had used part of the money to pay down the mortgage on their house, and part to hire 2 more people at the landscaping company, and that things were better. She said she was sorry for what had happened with Dad. She asked if we could have coffee. I said yes. We've had coffee 3 times since then, She's easier to be with than I expected. She doesn't mention the dinner. I don't mention it either. We talk about her kids and my jobs and things that don't have envelopes around them. Harper Build Company closed the fiscal year ending March 2024 with $1.2 million in revenue, 18 employees, 2 active residential development contracts, and a commercial retrofit project that will run through the end of 2025. D, my operations manager who came on in year 3, had been telling me for 2 years we were ready to scale. She was right. After the settlement, I had the capital to prove it. I framed the wire transfer confirmation and hung it in my office. Not the amount. I blacked that out. Just the date and the words, "Payment received in full." It's the only thing on the wall behind my desk. Grandfather's pencil is in my breast pocket, same as always. It's been 11 months since the October dinner, 8 months since the hearing. The Knoxville summer has turned into fall again, the same low gold light coming through windows, the same cooling mornings. I drove past the Glenwood Avenue house last week. The new contractor's work is visible if you know what to look for. The kitchen window they replaced sits slightly different in the frame than my work would have. Not wrong, just different. A different hand. The house I built is not on Glenwood Avenue. It's in the accounts, in the 18 people who show up every morning, in Hector's green notebook stacked on a shelf in the job trailer, in the buildings that will be standing in Knoxville in 30 years, with Harper Build Company on the permit of record. My name, my signature, authorized. My grandfather gave me a pencil when I was 9 years old. He didn't give me money or connections or a college fund or a cream envelope with his initials on it. He gave me a tool and a sentence. You've got the eye, Jade. Don't let anybody take it from you. Nobody took it. I think about my father sometimes, not with the anger I carried through most of 2023, more with something like clarity, the kind you arrive at when you stop waiting for a person to see you and start building things they'll have to look at whether they want to or not. He told me I was on my own. He meant it as a dismissal. He was right, but not in the way he thought. Being on your own means every foundation you pour is yours. Every frame you raise is yours. Every permit filed under your name is filed because you chose it. Nobody handed you the site. Nobody co-signed the vision. The building stands because you built it. If you've ever been told you were on your own, like it was something to be ashamed of, you already know what I'm talking about. You built it anyway. Maybe you're still building it. Either way, you're not alone in the building. Share this with someone who needed to hear it tonight. Leave a comment. I read everyone. And if you're not subscribed yet, this is the channel for people who measured twice and cut once and never needed anyone to hand them the lumber. I'll see you in the next one.